Hello, everybody. Welcome to Parallax. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We have Elung and Bard here, two Alexanders we are going to refer to as Elung and Bard. And we have one of our favorite people, Bonnitta Roy, who likes to be called Bonnie. So welcome, and we're going to talk about metaphysics as I understand it, and today, among other things. And I want to begin with Elung. And you want to introduce yourself to our gang, Elung?
Yes, absolutely.
We don't see you as much around as some of the rest of us. Yeah.
I've been a part of IDB for a few years, which is where me and Bart met each other, which is an intellectual philosophy discussion forum. And me and Bart quickly connected on a concept called Transcendental Emergence theory, which is basically at its core a way to understand like different vectors of being, all the way from physics to phenomenology and like everything that comes between the two. Now I'm getting a EOS webcam utility thing from Andrew. Okay, now the spirit.
It's the spirit of Gurdjieff. The spirit of Gurdjieff haunts this conversation. So be prepared for things like that.
Always,
okay.
Always.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm a screenwriter. I write television shows, and I work as a composer as well. My background was in law and legal philosophy, and then through my work as a writer and a composer, I've gotten increasingly more and more interested in philosophy and emergence theory, process theory in particular. And recently, my interest has taken me to a reinterpretation of phenomenology, which came as a reaction to what me and Bart was working on in regards to transcendental emergentism, where I thought, well, we have all these systems that we use to describe what is outside us. But what I really found interesting and necessary was understanding how that related to the self and projection in some sense. So like the idea that the way we understand the world around us largely is a product of projection. So like if you're a staunch materialist, like maybe it's because there is some psychological archetypical let's say foundation where you reject like the spirit. And like in the other sense, if you're a staunch idealist, like maybe you're rejecting matter. So like in a sense, the way we understand the world around us is based in like our understanding of ourselves. So I think like the step that I have taken recently is trying to understand like how our theories relate to our phenomenological experience and our archetypology. So let's say the study of archetypes in relations to let's say ontology and epistemology.
I just want to say that I met Elung online, and then we met in Denmark several times. I live in Sweden myself, and I just loved finding a brother from Scandinavia who understood Whitehead. And this is where Elung connects really well with Bonnie here. So that's why I'm really thrilled about this conversation. And Whitehead, I think, is a good starting point. And of course, I wrote Prost and Event to give Jan Söderqvist, but we richly give credit in the book to Brede Elung, because it was actually me and Brede Elung who sat down in Denmark and basically laid out what we now call Transcendental Emergentism, within which consciousness is one domain among many domains. And therefore, it's welcome that somebody goes into one of those domains, for example, like consciousness or subconsciousness, I prefer to call it, and tries to study it from its own perspective.
So I'm going to do something really geeky here for the audience. I'm going to read what the glossary says Transcendental Emergentism is. Is that okay? I know it's really geeky and has no spice to it. So the metaphysical conviction. So that's cool. We already know, that we're dealing with metaphysics. We don't have to be shy about that. That history consists of various emergences and their vectors. And I think that phrase it's very interesting. And I'm going to ask you about that. And that no meta laws exist outside the specific emergence vectors besides the law of existence's fundamental contingency. That is, there only exists one meta law, and it is the law stating that no meta law exists. Okay. It's not really recursive because you're saying that fundamentally existence is contingent, right? And then it sounds recursive. I just want to note that. The fact that everything seems to influence everything else in our actual universe is thereby only a contingent event. So these things are very interesting to me because they're certainly Whiteheadian themes, but that does not sound like Whitehead at all, okay? Because Whitehead has necessities and contingencies. So it's very interesting to me. Existence's neutral monism is in itself no predetermined meta law, okay? In the same way that no emergence vector can or must be prioritized above another, other than as an expression of anthropocentric arbitrariness. That's very interesting. I'm going to highlight that. The transcendental emergentism thus consists both of the irreducibility of the various emergence vectors vis-a-vis each other, okay, so they're not reducible, and the irreducible of potential future emergences vis-a-vis today's actual theory. That word theory is not, I don't understand that, why that is that word. See further. Okay, so I think that this is just a way to start, and I want to talk about emergences and their vectors. That what happens to me in this kind of, I think.
Can I just clarify one thing though, so we don't have misunderstanding we don't need to have. We make a difference between law, meta law, and principle. So there can be a principle. Principle is in a way it's tautological fundamentally. So a principle, for example, can exist. You know, to be very straightforward, in a Deleuzean manner, our philosophy starts with shit happens. All we know is that shit happens, and the question is, what kind of shit is shit?
Right.
And what does it mean that something happens? And what kind of happenings have higher value than other happenings? So we start from here and now. In that sense, I think Whitehead is at that, certainly Deleuze. As I always say that when I met Mano Deleuze at Princeton, and I asked him, so how many years did you study Whitehead? And he said, I never opened a book by Whitehead, I only studied Deleuze. It's just like, okay, that means Deleuze and Whitehead are the same guy. One is French, one is British, and live in America. So for me, I came to Whitehead through Deleuze, and if you go to Deleuze through Whitehead, you probably arrive in a very similar place too. So I just want to clarify that principles can exist in the sense that principles are in their own evidence. What we mean provocatively by saying that the only meta law that exists, that there is no meta law, is to stress that we must keep people within their domains to understand that laws are basically habits over long periods of time. They're repeated within domains. So we don't take the law, which is a metaphor, and Elung knows this, he's a philosopher of legality. So we don't take the law, which is basically a metaphor for how to control people in a society. We don't take for granted that nature cares about the laws that human beings invent. And that's the point with using the words the way we did. So maybe
laws
that
are
clarifies
habits, you
a bit.
said.
Yeah,
that's kind of interesting to me. Okay.
Yeah, but we can get back to that later. But I just wanted to stress that because I don't want Bonnie to she's so fucking sharp. It's incredible. So I don't want her to misunderstand us this early on. Because then go back to emergence of vectors if you like, please.
Yeah. No, I think everything you said, I understood as that. You know, look, everybody's a neo-Whiteheadian, and we're all stewing in that innovation that has, you know, that is not just Whitehead's, as you said, but we're all extrapolating and innovating from it too. So, yeah. Okay. So when you write emergences and their vectors, so I'm the type of person, when I do philosophy, especially if I'm doing metaphysics, I get these drawings in my head. And so one of the things, and I might have said this last time, I don't know, things are going so fast. So one of the things that is interesting to me is usually when people think of a vector, they think of a bifurcation. And one of the recent insights in the work that I'm doing is that there's no axiomatic reason why that at a vector point, there should be a bifurcation. There could be an exfurcation, where X stands for a multiple variable greater than 2. And I think this is extremely important because we have trouble since Kaufman really worked it out, explaining why there's so much complexity in the universe. Because if things just bifurcated and bifurcated, yeah, you'd get a branching structure of complexity, but it can't happen fast enough. So just want to see if that works for you.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. One of the way we define vectors is through like irreducible difference. So while there are things like we can take for Whitehead, like relation and societies and events that happens across vectors, the way they interact, the events are radically different. So like if we take, like, let's say music theory, and we use a concept like relation between notes, that is a radically different conception from the relation between, let's say, particles in a molecule. So like, I think like what we are trying to avoid by saying there are no meta laws is saying, well, it's not the same thing that is happening. Although we use descriptive representational language to describe it, and that's where the, let's say, the anthropocentric projection comes into play, because in some sense, the real itself has a linguistic structure. Like even before language, there is some sort of linguistic structure which language is patterned upon. So like when we use language, we are describing something which behaves in a way which makes it possible for language at least to interact with it. But when we use a concept like, let's say, relation, it's not the same thing that's happening when molecules are relating as when humans are relating. So it's more of a principle rather than a law that repeats itself across vectors.
I can just simplify. I can simplify this too by using a very fresh example. Elon Musk was on Lex Friedman's show the other day and probably had 1 million times more viewers than we ever have. And he was being this total Platonist idiot in the sense that not even Plato was. And he just said that there was physics and he built everything over physics. Wait, he's a fucking engineer. That's why he became a multi-million billionaire and he's a great innovator and goes off to Mars or whatever he wants to do. Engineers are supposed to build on physics to do engineering well. But then he jumps to the conclusion, because he made $1 billion from that, he's some kind of philosophical authority, and instantly jumps over to, well, then there's consciousness, and then there must be consciousness everywhere, because physics is everywhere and he can't even tell the difference. And here's the thing, he doesn't get a iota of metaphysics. Metaphysics starts with understanding that, first of all, this difference, and then we need to discuss what kind of differences there are. The question is rather, is there even some kind of whole world or unity or something? An idea which Whitehead played with Deleuze's question was that, is there even a world, or is that just another fantasy we have? Oh, we know that there's difference everywhere. And this is what's so striking, that a very intelligent man like Elon Musk can't even get that. So the enemy we are now finally going after big time is reductionism. And the reductionism are two versions. One of them is physicalism. It's a lot of people tend to rely on now that, well, physics is the only thing we trust. Well, it turns out even physics is full of contradiction. Probably physics is even several different emergence vectors that have been clumsily put into one. It doesn't make any sense, which is an argument we call it subphysics, and physics should be different categories to begin with. But we also say that, and other people who find consciousness everywhere, well, it's so diluted in that sense, and it doesn't make any sense to be conscious. Usually those people are probably not even conscious themselves when they say such things. So we just want to get rid of reductionism in both angles, and the attack against both is to say there is difference. The question is, how do we say something about difference that's meaningful? And then it turns out, since we live along a time axis, we cannot say anything permanently, even about difference itself. We can only temporarily say something about difference as human beings. And therefore, the theory has to be transcendental. And then we go to the word emergence and start looking at emergence properly to do philosophy about it.
Yeah, but it's true that when like Whitehead talks about, let's say, subjectivity, you would think that like the subjectivity of a conscious mind is the same as the subjectivity we see between particles or events. But like I think like the point that Bart is making as well is that there are radical differences. So when we are talking about like conscious subjectivity, even though we are using the same concepts, if we are using a Whiteheadian language, it's not really the same thing that's happening. It's just the way we use representational language.
Yeah, so there's a lot there. So I would say that, you know, what you call difference, and you used your hand like this, I call it eternal ongoingness. We have to come to terms with the eternal ongoingness and these exfurcations, you know, this is eternal ongoingness. And if you think you're going to trace reality down to one Platonic metaphysical atom, monism, then you've stopped the internal ongoingness. I mean, and you can't escape, you know, the epistemic process is part of the real. So like, yeah, and I agree. So when Elung says there's physics, and he abstracts from that statement that physics is also scientific process in time, then he's not talking about something real. He's talking about something ontically imaginary or something. And then the other thing I hear in my terms, I mean, we're trying to do semantic mapping here. So it's like when someone reduces everything up to consciousness, then they're performing, they're implicitly implying that then things can reduce down to matter. You can't say everything reduces up to consciousness if you not have this mental model that therefore I can trace this back down to something which is its opposite. And that's a big metaphysical mistake. I have a question for you though now, if we can move on. I'm trying to understand chapter 9.
We should say that chapter 9 in Process Event is called Transcendental Emergentism. So this is the key chapter.
Yeah. And, you know, I think it hangs together very well. You know, I know there's a lot of other stuff going on. So when you have, I forget what Elung said, but he talked about these emergence vectors. When that happens, is there a sense in which they can create a gradient array? Like, is there so instead of having a line and vectors, is there a sense in which if you look at the whole, there's all these emergent vectors and in it, and then they act like a gradient array. I don't like Gibson's ecological array. Would that be something that, you know, so they establish these habits because they're not laws, but they're like this gradient array in which reality has to be related to?
Here's the trick. Very good question, but here's the trick. That's why we call it Transcendental Emergentism, and we say there's no general emergence theory.
Right.
There is none. There's no general rule for what an emergence is beforehand. Here's the very Hegelian move we make. Transcendentality literally means that if a new emergence would occur in history, we would have to rewrite the entire theory and reposition what an emergence is, because the new emergence would probably totally throw away all previous concepts of what emergence is, because we are human beings in our subjectivity, and this is our world we were creating. That's all philosophers can ever do. So what we mean in transcendental emergentism are two things. One is that no emergence vector is reducible to any other. If a new emergence ever occurs, all the other emergence vectors active in that universe will have an influence on the new emergence vector. So all
That's not
all
only
things that it's very
epistemolo-
white-headed. Everything that exists will
Right.
have an influence on the emergence if something occurs. If something occurs, any sort of conscious attempt to understand what's going on would have to then redefine the entire theory in itself and restart the idea of what the world looks like. So our theory is not, it's only eternal in the meta sense. It's not eternal in the way it is, for example, in science. So what we're saying is that this is all that can be said. The best comments we've had, Elung and I, on TE, since we presented theory, is that philosophers say, oh God, that's so underwhelming. Because then we succeeded, because this is all about pulling the rug from so much rubbish metaphysics out there, especially Heidegger. We love Whitehead, we hate Heidegger. It's like pulling the rug from underneath. There's so much metaphysical garbage out there, for example, that you can generally say something about subjectivity, and then you read Heidegger, and all you discover Heidegger is writing about himself. Well, I'm not Heidegger. Bonnie's not Heidegger, Elung's not Heidegger, so why would he have a theory about us? He doesn't. So we get rid of so much rubbish in metaphysics by basically saying there's very little left and we're finished with this, but that's exactly the point, because you want to work at having a really credible foundation for all the other theories you're going to build about humanity and its history, etc. For example, the theory on paradigmatics that we then develop in human history, which is built on T. So I needed to sit down with Elung in Copenhagen and really go through T properly, because for me, going back to John Söderqvist was like, now we have a proper, complete metaphysical theory, which says very little, but it says what can be said. And that was the point.
It's a cautionary tale.
It's daring to kill people who are, powerful or whatever as well. In this case, they probably haven't discovered yet, but they sooner or later will. But yeah, I'd say that the other part of this is Hegel. I'll give you another example. Hegel comes in. You said eternal ongoing, and why I love the term, but I would disagree with it here, is that number one, we don't do eternity. We try to avoid the term as much as we possibly can. The only infinities where we talk about a poetic infinities, like your own subjectivity. You never find yourself, and then you die. Right? So we don't use the word eternal. Whitehead uses it. It makes it more complicated. We skipped it. So we don't use the zero. We don't use the infinity sign in our philosophy at all, because we have never found them anywhere. And they cannot even be thought. And the people who try to think them like good go crazy. So maybe it's just because there shouldn't be that idea to begin with. But what we do allow ourselves to do instead is to rethink what the other categories would be. So, for example, in my philosophy, John, I don't know if Elung agrees, there's a concept called hypertime. Because if you're going to start with time rather than space, which Western philosophy did from Hegel, Nietzsche did it, Whitehead did it, all the great thinkers after Hegel do time first, then space. Then you have to have a category called hypertime rather than hyperspace, and start from hypertime. And for me, the ongoing thing is just time itself, and try to imagine time without anything being attached to it. Mm-hmm. But then if you throw anything, like if you do a big bounce or a big bang and throw anything onto like mass or something, space starts occurring. And when space occurs to time, time behaves in certain ways. We get space-time, and we can do physics out of it. But if you do imagine hypertime, you can imagine subphysics. So for me, what's ongoing is hypertime. What's attached to what's ongoing is then space. And space exists simply to harbor difference. That's clearly what we find in space. It's just loaded with difference, and that's exactly where we start the philosophy from. So the shit happens thing is somewhere there.
Is hypertime related to emergence?
No, not directly,
totally
but
different concepts. I'm just trying to understand what hypertime.
Yeah, I did superstring theory as anybody did in the 1990s. I was absolutely enthusiastic about it. It mathematically made sense. It looked beautiful. And then I started discovering that if you just added more and more dimensions to things, eventually the problems seem to disappear. Would you just added lots of dimensions that don't exist? So you were in fantasy land already. That made me very, very skeptical. I found out that some physicists were already have left the field, thought this is not going to go anywhere, and they started doing low quantum gravity. I discovered low quantum gravity was background independent. Okay, that's Einstein. They haven't learned the lesson from Einstein. The superstring theorists are doing pre-Einsteinian thinking. But the lesson from Einstein was that everything relates to everything else. Whitehead, Einstein, Hegel, everything relates to something else. And if you move one thing, you move everything else in the universe. You literally do that. So, okay, Then I discovered, okay, but they're doing hyperspace. And it's an interesting idea. Here's what philosophy is. Philosophy is about interesting ideas, not about being right. And Witten did hyperspace. I said, but that's actually the other way around. It would be much more interesting to try to think time without space, because you can't think a world without time, but you can think things without space. So at least philosophically speaking, it makes more sense after Hegel and Whitehead to do hypertime. Let's just think hypertime and see if we can think it. And then we can start thinking space-time, and we can think in math and difference and physics. And out of that, we can think the other categories.
I think you're touching on something very important here, which is like the structures of ideas and how it relates to the real. So like one of the things you're saying is that, well, it's an interesting idea and therefore it must connect to something, which is what, even though like you were like criticizing Heidegger, what he calls caring, or to care about something, means that there are something there to care about. So when you are caring about the differentiation between, let's say, hypertime and space, well, it means there's something there that has an importance, which is important enough for us to talk about it. But in that sense, we also have to talk about like the intelligibility of the real. Like, is it even possible to describe what is, or are we just like describing representational structures? And is the difference important at all? I would say that it isn't. I would say that it is, we should take for granted, or use it as an axiom even, that when we are describing something, we are not necessarily describing the thing, we are describing how the representation of the thing relates to our linguistic structures. Because if we were describing the thing itself, the explanation would have to be as large as the thing itself. And it would look like an incomprehensible data set, which we would not be able to, like, let's say, transmit through language at all. So whenever we are talking about, let's say, the difference between prima materia or relation, we're using it in a sense where it makes sense to us, like you were touching on monads earlier, Bonnie, where you were talking about, well, is there some prime materia which everything is created from? Well, if we can make a narrative where it makes sense and it provisionally will explain our experiences, then yes. But what Bart was saying was that, well, when we discover a new vector, emergence vector, the whole explanation has to change. So it's not that, it doesn't make sense. It's not.
Yeah, but there's a slippery slope here. It's in your book too, and maybe it's because my mind is, not up to speed, but I don't want to talk about the slippery slope yet. I want to ask specific questions so I can get into, I've got a few. So let's see which one. So I want to first start with difference and Hegel. So if difference is irreducible, is it commensurable? Is there like a move where you can see all this difference and then move to a perspective where you can see that they're the same? Can you do a synthetic on difference? Is that possible, or do we just live in a world of difference?
Well, for
Hegel uses, Hegel says that everything has its own contradiction built to it. And he's talking about representations here. So the contradiction within the word is always within the word itself. So you can never stop with Hegel. No word is ever fixed. It just moves on. Language moves on. And we're claiming, even Syntheism is not claiming that the world itself operates that way. We call it pan-dialecticism to provoke here. I would say leave it to Elung. Elung, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Like
I can give you a very literal expression actually how Hegel operates with the time axis. But let's do Elung first.
The question is, do we live in a world of pure difference, or is there a synthetic meta move or something in which there difference at local, hyperlocal nodes or whatever can be commensurable or adjudicated? So that is
in science of logic, Hegel describes the problem of A equals A. So the problem with A equals A is that A never amounts to anything. It doesn't mean anything. So there has to be a difference between A and A delta, you call it in mathematics, for instance, before A can ever emerge. So Hegel says that, for anything to exist, it has to be different from itself, whether it be like in time, there's like a time axis where, well, it wasn't the same as it was like a Planck's second ago. So there's a difference which makes existence possible in itself. The other idea is the Platonic idea where things can exist as monads by themselves without relating to anything. But then you have to ask the question, how does that thing gain any attributes? So like if something has weight or let's say speed or anything else, it can only gain those attributes by relating to something else. So A is inherently a meaningless concept. So from a Hegelian perspective and also a Whiteheadian perspective, a difference is necessary for existence.
And this moves on to a weird difference between virtuality and potentiality, which Deleuze never bothered with. Deleuze did virtuality and actuality. We do potentiality in between them. So something being virtual means that it has no qualities at all. It only subsists. It's really weird, but we have to look at it that way. So it has only subsistence, not existence. It was Elung who came up with the word subsistence here. So I owe it to him. The subsistence means it doesn't have existence at all. So we're really weird ontology territory, but that's the thing, potentiality. The point is that the potentiality is where relations suddenly occur and that it has a meaningful kind of ontological existence to it. So the thing is to actually compare Hegel and White and see they're both right. The two different ways of approaching that the relation comes first, the relata is the byproduct of relation. That's what we're trying to do. What Hegel does fantastically is that he puts it along the time axis. And Hegel's worldview in the world is like a zipper. It's like everything you've zipped is the past. It's locked in. It's a necessity. It cannot be changed. Whatever has happened cannot be changed. There's a factual history there. But it's still open and it's contingent. And I'm, as a subject, part of the freedom of the contingency before the zipper comes and looks in history and passes by until the day I die, right? So the idea with Hegel is basically the contingency is always in the future and the necessities in the past. And what we can beautifully do then is you can put the virtuality and actuality on opposite sides. And what's then happening is exactly what we do with philosophy on the now. It's like philosophers always avoid doing the now. They want to do past and future. Yeah, men do. Maybe it's because women are the now or something. I don't know. But I wanted to do philosophy on the now, the infinite now, ecstatic, the trauma at the bottom, you know, the most intense experience in your life and anything mediocre in between, like an everyday copy on a Tuesday afternoon, right? So you would have that in your life as well to see that. What now is, the now is a potentiality because when now happens, it hasn't taken its specific form yet and become a necessity. Once it's past, it's an actuality. And therefore, we put the potentiality on the now to then allow what hasn't happened yet to be virtual.
Yeah, there's a way of sneaking in Platon without actually using like Platonic idealism.
I call it Darwinian forms instead of Platonist forms. So
it is because like if you look at a guy like Wheeler, for instance, like free geometry or something like that, like you have the idea that, well, for a triangle or any interaction to emerge, there has to be some, and we don't want to say pre-existent, but instead we use the word subsistent principles for like the interactions to take place, even to begin with.
Your subsistence is in the virtual, not in the potential, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So it's a way
Potential
to
is when existence starts.
Chandler talks about subsistence, but there's subsisting potentials, and you're saying subsistence is prior.
This is exactly the confusing thing that happened in philosophy of the past. People are mixing up virtual and potential. They must be separated. Virtual and potential, potency, power. What that in Whitehead is a relation.
Yeah.
And in physics, it's the Higgs boson or whatever that gives mass to something. Things collide all the time. And when differences collide, relations occur, and that's when we as human beings have something meaningful to say ontological about anything. Without a relation being involved, there's nothing there. In Hegel, this is obvious, as Elung gave examples of. This is also obviously Whitehead. Here's the connection between the two thinkers that we love. It is that there is a theory. What I then sat down with John and did after I was through with Transcendental Emergentism was to develop the VPA, which is a consequence of it. Virtuality, potentiality, actuality is just the reversed order of necessity, the now, and contingency in Hegel.
Yeah, so we can call
Okay,
it like
hold on.
Darwinism.
So the contingencies in the virtual?
Yeah, exactly. It's actually reversed, but yeah, they are connected. So they should be understood as saying something about the same thing. The future in that case, but we think about it like something that hasn't happened yet. Absolutely. Virtual and contingency here, absolutely.
I mean, this is the
And
problem.
the actual
with
and the
yeah.
necessity here, because the actual, and this is the thing, even with transcendental
can I just-
emergentism, we're not going
Yeah.
to deny that anything ever happened, but we have to reinterpret it. TE is an interpretation.
Okay,
of
but
what
there's
happened.
something, I think we should talk about this because I'm not arguing with you. I want to, this is something that's confusing in Whiteheadian because, so you have the virtual, which is the subsistence, and then the potential, which is relation, and then the actuality. But you see, the funny thing is that it's not prior, present. It's prior, present. It's not prior, present, future. The actual is the past. So it goes prior, present, past, and the future is the new emergence in the subsistence.
Well, Whitehead calls it the primordial, right? As far as I remember. So it's like the thing that exists or subsists before time. That's like the Whiteheadian concept for it. Wheeler calls it pre-geometry. Bolton calls it the implicate order. It's a necessity for anything to exist that there is something that guides it. You can also call it logos. But like what we are trying to avoid is the Platonic ideal, which is the sense that, well, there exists this world where everything is coming from. What we are saying is that, well, it doesn't exist before it relates. So
Right.
we can't call it existence because it doesn't have time.
Exactly. Another way of framing that is the fact that something can be thought as possible in the future doesn't mean that it's a potential because it doesn't exist now. It has no potency. So to try to really get to what Hegel means when he radically says relations are prior to relata, it turns out Hegel is actually saying the very same thing. But
Right.
Hegel's way of phrasing it is that a relata is its own relation.
Right. But
A relata cannot be anything, but it's
right. But
except its own contradictory
the
relation.
actuality has no potential. It's impotent because it's in the past.
Exactly.
But the
It's already
subsistence-
done. It's already
Okay, the
done.
subsistence is impotent because it's not relational yet. Is that correct?
Exactly.
But it's not the same kind of impotence.
No,
it's
true.
It's
True.
This is very important. Is it?
No, but actuality is impotent as actuality, but the very relata, which is actuality and now exists in the world, ontologically speaking, can have new relations, but then the relations are central, not the relata. For example, here's a conversation. And we say in language, you say there's Bonnie and Elung and Bard and Andrew sitting in a conversation. In reality, there's a conversation. The primary thing is the conversation. And wherever Bonnie or Bard or Elung and Andrew goes afterward, hopefully still alive after this conversation, which is fantastic, by the way, we're byproducts of that relation. So the primary thing in our philosophy is to always think relation, try to stay with relation as long as possible, because we human beings have a tendency to fall back into the obsession with the object, with Immanuel Kant. And with Hegel and Whitehead, they take us out of the obsession with the object, away from object. Graham Harman, these guys are Kantians today. No, let's not go back there. Let's stay with Hegel, Nietzsche, and Whitehead. Let's stay with relations as relations first, because that's how the world operates. And that's actually how human beings operate. We're deeply social beings. We are first and foremost social beings. We're attached to our mother's body for months after we're born, before we're shocked the day when mother's body walks out of the room and something else is left and we scream. Traumatically scream, non-mother. I'm no mother. So the first I experience is non-mother thing. So human beings are a perfect example of a creature completely dependent on relations. The shocking thing is, why did we do philosophy relata first? We did it because we had law and wanted to control human beings in a society, and we had the law to police them and control them. Therefore, we taught them, you are a single human being, therefore you do as I say. It's power structures
Barry
that fosters.
Sandywell traces the the transition from the mindset from like cosmological and lyric culture to Platonic, looking at cosmology as a set of laws. He traces that to Plato's Republic and the move humans were involved in making larger city states, and they projected onto the cosmology this great new law-based metaphysics that they had, let's say. And that definitely happens in time. So that's what you're saying. Even the way we then look at cosmology changes contingent to the vectors that are happening historically.
And here's where we go prior to Plato, to Heraclitus, and then go back to the root of Heraclitus, the Zoroaster. We read the Gothas, 1200 years before Plato, imagining the empire, Zoroaster Bestaspa, creating the first empire in Persia without mistaking society's laws for being the laws of nature and keeping them separate. And this is the necessity. I see Plato's Temptation did a beautiful work. Wow, Republic is an amazing book. But my problem is that Plato and Rousseau are fantastic enemies of mine because they write great books, and they should. So I'm up against something. But fundamentally, law is a legal word that should be firmly kept in legality. And when it comes to laws of nature, I said they're habits of nature, and since they seem to be repetitive within their own emergence vectors, we can accept, we call them laws, but they're local. There are no global laws for the universe as a whole.
So what about archetypes?
Archetypes, the way we use it is pre-Jung, so it's not Jungian, right? Please keep that in mind. Archetypes in the fundamental sense, the Aristotelian sense, is that human beings live in a world of forms. The forms are not created prior to us. The forms are actually Darwinianly developed. We call them Darwinian forms. So we as human beings are archetypes with different personality types. We're men and women and anything in between or whatever, with different natures, things like that. Fathers and mothers and sons and daughters or whatever, archetypes. But also the world around us archetype. Here's the microphone. It's a contemporary archetype, etc. So the different things we have around us, the objects we orientate ourselves around are archetypes. It's better to use the word archetype here because it pulls us back into phenomenology, like Elung said, and therefore it creates a world from which we created, that we can compare our world with other human beings and discover that with certain similarities in our worldview, and we call that archetypology. What's great with doing archetypology is that it changes very, very slowly. It changes as slow as evolution itself. Human beings during 10,000 years of history have not changed much. If anything, our brains have shrunk in the last 5,000 years, and they will shrink even more with social media, probably. So since we haven't really developed, which is nonsense, technology is what has developed. So we can then put human beings in archetypology and say, you certainly had a role in the original nomadic tribe because otherwise you would be around today. And if that says you're a revolutionary winner, we can't guarantee you have a role in today's society. You better find one. But we can help you do that. And the paradigmatics allows us to then say, this is what changes over time. And the paradigms are fundamentally technological, even information technological in our philosophy. That's how we use archetypology.
So you need to balance the paradigmatics with the archetypes in some way, so that they don't become Platonic forms.
And now people have discovered that we can probably kill most of psychologists called today with archetypology. You can have that conversation with Greg Enriquez on your academy here, because it turns out that psychology is basically not being used by powers to control people and put them back into work into society to very specific, predictable roles without much freedom. With archetypology, you can say that, well, it doesn't suit me. I'm going to move out into the wilderness and probably live happier there because my archetype is there, and the archetypes that I should be surrounded with are in wilderness. So I think archetypology is incredibly helpful for people. I'm using it myself in the most extreme of cases, which is transitioning for people who change their sex, which is incredibly helpful to use archetypology. So archetypology can be very, very useful. And let's see how far we can take it by working with it. Bonnie, you have a fantastic list. Did we answer your question, or we have another question coming up?
Oh, I have a big question. I'm not sure what we want to ask it, so I'm just sitting with it here. All right, I'll just ask it. So
you must ask it now. Yeah.
have a feeling I'm just going to be underwhelmed with the answer, though, because I can see. Okay, so what is causality? What are causal relationships in your transcendental, your TE? Is there anything like causal? Are contingencies contingencies powerful enough to be causal? How do you deal with that?
Well, what we do is that we go through the concepts of determinism and indeterminism, an old question in philosophy, and basically just get sick of them. Because we discovered, of course, that when you look at determinism and indeterminism, a process can be both. The process can start at a certain point, end up at a point, but have a very unpredictable way there. So they don't make any sense. So the only way you can leave it is to say that the world is fundamentally transdeterminist, which actually Hegel did without using the word. So that means there's a causality, but the causality is also affected by things out of its own control. So in that sense, there's not all causality.
Yeah, because
there's not a God finger.
So we come to the same place, because the way you started at first was like you were saying, well, if there's causality, there's determinism. And most people think that there's like, if there's causal relations, then the world universe is determinism. But you can have causal relations and have a completely indeterminate world. So, and what I understand Whitehead is saying about causal relations is that they have there's a temporal structure to the world, and that is, and it's not that it's not that there are causes that create effects. It's that the effects what's the word? Once the effect gets actualized, then the some of the potentials only subsist, and some of them can be traced down to the cause. So at first there's this subsistence, and then certain parts of that become relations. I'm trying to use their words, and then that becomes actuals. And from each one of these things can be traced back retrospectively, so that effects actually fix their causes. And that's what would be causality in a completely contingent or indeterminate reality. So I think they can go to
I think one way to look
very
about
important.
it.
I call it fuzzy causality. So you can allow to use
Farsi?
Fuzzy. Fuzzy. Fuzzy.
Oh, fuzzy. I thought you
fuzzy
said
logic. Fuzzy cause. This just happened as a fuzzy cause. Or as determinist, I always ask them when I talk to them, so if I murder you right now and everything is determinist, I won't go to prison then because I couldn't do anything else. Yeah. Yes. It turns out the determinists are never determinists at the end of the day.
I call it numinous causality. Same thing. Yeah.
Well, there's also, like, from a Whiteheadian perspective, there's also a sense of, like, what he calls the primordial order is like changing through societies of events. So, like, if we take like a dice, there is an obvious set of potentials that can happen when I throw the dice, like 1 through 6, right? But that's a system where there is a list of potentialities that can occur, but is built upon like existing structures. So you could call that discrete events, which Whitehead does to some extent, but there is also like a form of, let's say, ad hoc. Like when we look at it, it looks like continuity because we are describing something. But really, it's just discrete events happening at larger levels of complexity. So, like within every like event, those events are built on previous events. We call those conglomerations for societies, and within those societies, they have their own potentials. So, if we put like 100 people on a deserted island, there are things that can happen, and there are things that cannot happen. So, like potentiality changes depending on the given scenario.
Yeah. So all potentials, they're infinite but not exhaustive, right? So
I wouldn't say infinite.
I
would say infinite but not exhaustive.
Exactly. It's a monist universe. Everything in the universe affects everything else. That means that when somebody tells me, well, if I throw a dice, it's going to end up in a certain way that's determined, I said, okay, so what is the gravity in that case where the dice is thrown? Is that a vacuum, or is there some air in there? Was that a little wind coming through the room? Did your mother just open and yell at you? Yeah, it's absurd. It gets absurd when you consider the many differences involved having an effect, which means we call that contingency. And that's when you get totally exhausted in this as a human being. You get exhausted and accept transdeterminism as fundamental. Because determinism, indeterminism is all about little boys controlling the world. That's where the whole idea comes from. And at the end of the day, there's no such thing.
Well, I think that we should maybe stay with the concept of infinite. And I want to understand what Bonnie is saying when she says infinite.
I call it poetic infinity. I can't agree on anything. Enormity is the word we use in the book.
Well, what do you mean
by infinity? It's an enormous amount of things involved.
Maybe we agree, but we are just using different words.
So I said
no, we don't, because you cannot have an infinity. You can't have an infinity in a universe that exists for 40 billion years. You must have an infinite universe. You don't.
I agree.
Bonnitta, speak.
Maybe Bonnie means something else.
So, there's Cantor sets of infinities. So not all some infinities are smaller than other infinities.
That's true. Yeah.
So the term infinite but not exhaustive means it's infinite. Some things are taken out of the possibility. So for example, there was a time before there were elephants, and there may be a time when there are no elephants, but there will never be a time when there was never any elephants. So there's still a lot of infinite possibilities still available, but never having any elephants has been taken out of potential. And this is extremely important because nobody wants to talk about this. It's like, from a psycho-spiritual sense, is that there'll never be another you. And it'll never be taken out of the subsistence field that there was a you. And I think that the phrase I use is infinite but not exhaustive. There are some things that get taken out of the potential. And if we paid attention to what gets taken out of the potential and took those things seriously, I think our behaviors would really change.
You're using infinity from a negation. So I would say I prefer the word enormity, and I'm adamant about it because the word infinity has fucked up philosophy so badly.
I have some of the same.
So we develop enormity, enormitismals rather than infinitesimals because you go all the way down to Planck length and end. Right.
Okay.
So enormity, it's just better words.
Payback. Here comes payback. Why do you call? Okay, I understand why you call linear time patriarchal or masculine or phallic.
Sure.
Why does matriarchal time have to be circular? There's many different other types of time, different ways, shapes.
Oh, here we go.
Fucking circle.
Bonnie, you just proved my point. It's only from the perspective of circular time you would say there's so many different circles out there. That's perfect. It's like one of my students said once, I don't want to be the mythos. I don't want to be this one thing. I want to be like men are. They're logos and pathos in eternal conflict. Said, oh, well, that's exactly the sort of wishful thinking, which is called mythos. You just proved my point. We're being
but you need to, that's my alert. The word circular is doing for me the same thing that the word infinite is doing to you.
Listen, word linear has had a really bad
it.
reputation the last 100 years. So we men have to live with being some kind of linear obsessed. You know, anti-linear was developed to get out of it. So you can do anti-circular. So why don't you go anti-circular? In that case, you fight circular and see what you come up with philosophically. You're perfectly welcome there. This is the point. The point is that it's in the anthropological imagination that these different concepts have been developed and the Persians try to unify them. The mistake was to go on the only one of them after that revolution. The East tragically went with process, ended up with caste societies and nothing ever improved. And the West went the eventologies without the process, which I think is the mistake of Islamic Christianity. They became obsessed with life after death. They built huge funerals and graveyards and pyramids and everything. And we wasted ourselves the last 3,000 years on that lie. So The pointer is to go back to what would it mean to try to think both at the same time? And that forces you to think time in two different dimensions, two different ways. So you can start to think hypertime and space-time as different categories. You can start to think linear and circular as both existing parallel. That's why the book is called Process and Event. It's not called Process or Event. We're trying to unify the best of Eastern and Western thinking in a very fundamental way. That's the point.
What's the other alternative to like time you're talking about, Bonnie? Like besides linear and circular? I'm interested in that.
No, I'm saying, so if I think of time in the way I relate to time, I feel that, there's different rhythms, there's different paces, there are multiple scales, there's something I can inhabit locally, and then that exists in a background of maybe an undulation, maybe the undulation exists in an upswelling kind of thing, and there's all these different shapes. It's not just circular, it's not just
I understand that.
This is
but I think when we use the word circular, I think like what Bart is talking about as well is that the linear understanding of time is very much based on like the phallus, or like the idea of, well, we have to make a plan and we have to see that plan through because there's an event happening in the future and we want to control it. So that's like the very masculine, not necessarily male, but masculine conception of time, which is like controlling the future. Where the feminine, again, not necessarily female, but the feminine conception of time is more, well, interrelatedness, which I gather what you're also describing, between different temporal events. So like everything sort of relates, and well, this conversation also relates to the conversation we had like 2 years ago, and the patterns between them are not necessarily going in a linear line. So like both perspectives are necessary, but also divided in the sense that you can't do both at the same time. You have to when you're communicating about them, you have to do it through relation or through like disagreement. And in that disagreement, we're probably edging closer to the truth. But it's just like a dichotomy of the way of seeing time, where like the real lies somewhere in between.
I had these conversations in India. In India, they were adamant that we are circular, motherly. It's a female body. It's a mother thing. They say Mother India. I talked to Indian artists, like script writers, had conversation in India with movie directors who won Oscars, and they say, "Oh God, we're so circular in India." So they take on the feminine. I just did a little test. It was just that who remembers birthdays the most, because birthdays only celebrate absolute being. Birthdays don't celebrate anything. I can't hear
Alexander. Can you hear me?
Okay.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Yeah, we can hear him.
Can hear you.
Yeah, but even like the news talks about.
Wait to make sure Bonnitta's born. Are you back in, Bonnitta? Can you hear us?
Okay.
But like the loose idea of a festival is that it's a repetition of the event itself. Like it's not like a linear path to a new event. We are trying to recreate the event itself, like in the difference and repetition. Yeah. He writes about this.
Yeah.
So,
okay. Let me just finish the other one. So the other one was that I did a simple survey. Turned out that women remember birthdays 4 times better than men do.
Not in my house.
Okay, that's you. Put it
because it's circular. Because it's circular.
You break all
women do that.
Rules,
this is like thousands of people surveyed, men and women. It turns out women remember birthday. Why? Men tend to celebrate that something actually happened, like somebody won the football game. Women tend to celebrate your being, which is fundamental for human beings.
Which is the beauty about the
pure existence.
Which is the beauty about our calendar. The calendar embraces both the cyclical event and the linear event. Because like we are moving forwards in time, but everything is repeating in like cyclical events as well. So it's two like fundamentally different ways of seeing time, but we have to combine it to make sense of the real.
Yeah, and you're right here, Elung, because process and event is basically difference and repetition by Deleuze, but the title is turned around.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah.
the repetition and difference.
It's not like when you're
the point is
celebrating
that
a birthday.
the point is difference is always a difference of the repetition. A slight change compared to the last lap would then be the event. It cannot be anything else than that.
Well, there's
so
a difference.
Feminine is basic.
I just had the image of the Zen circle, which is open-ended, right, compared to a closed circle or an Ouroboros circle.
Yeah.
Right? There's a difference between that kind of circle, which is it has this open end, so every circle would be different, rather than a geometrically closed circle, or the yin yang, which is a closed circle, right?
Yeah,
It's exactly.
For Deleuze, it's not like the birthday is not celebrating your birth, like the birth is celebrating your birthday, and that's the difference for Deleuze. It's like the birthday is the event, and the birth is celebrating the birthday.
Mm-hmm.
So because the birthday is out of time, it's happening in a cyclical place, where the birthday is just one place in a linear eventology. So that's the difference between linear and cyclical time, for Deleuze.
The birth is the virtual, and the birthdays are.
But like he says, like the events, when the Nazis were kicked out of Denmark, when we're celebrating that, the Day of Freedom is referring to the festival. It's not the opposite way. It's really interesting to think about it that way.
It's a reference to now instead of a reference to the past, you mean?
Yeah, because like the concept of the birth, the birthday is the thing itself, where the birth is just referencing the birthday.
The dark side of that is exactly, to make the point from Deleuze, is that Christians are forever doomed to celebrate the crucifixion.
Exactly.
Over and over again, because they haven't understood the crucifixion happened once, but the real crucifixion is the repetition of the crucifixion. The same thing with Muhammad. Muhammad is angry with his neighbors. Muhammad storms into Mecca and kills tons of people. Has to be repeated ever again. So the problem with the religion, which has event without process, which is much more absurd than the opposite.
But this is
we start with the process. The absurdity is you got to repeat endlessly something that was meant.
Yeah, but it's not like when we go through Easter. It's not like Easter is celebrating the crucifixion. The crucifixion is celebrating Easter.
Yeah,
because otherwise it wouldn't have any meaning.
Wait.
Okay, Bonnitta.
Now we have something
that's
mashed up in a peculiar way. I like that what you said, Elung, that the crucifixion is the repetition, celebration of the crucifixion. But
the crucifixion is the celebration of Easter. It's not the other way around.
Right, no. Ella, again. Christ is supposed to return, but he never returns. That's the madness of the whole operation.
Right. What returns is the celebration. Yeah. What returns is Easter. Okay. So then you said this is the problem with Christianity, because there's too much emphasis on the event, the crucifixion. And then it returns and returns and returns. But the event is masculine, and the return and the return and the return is feminine. So now we have this strange contradiction. So if the feminine is fixated on the event that returns and returns and returns, that's
the opposite way. The opposite way. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Wait a second.
Ellen,
this is a different conversation altogether. We're way from the book here. But to be honest about it, you're mistaking this, because Christianity is adamant that Christ will return.
Yeah, that's the masculine interpretation.
I don't think there's any other interpretation that any Christian belongs
to. Well, the feminine interpretation.
No.
The feminine interpretation. Let me just
Christianity never allowed female theologians to begin with.
Not having it.
It didn't allow women to be theologians. You're making this
always
up.
Happens when we talk about
this
Christianity.
is ridiculous. Listen, this is the madness of event without recognizing process. The process was subconsciously returned to and haunt you.
Yeah, but that's that's an eventological. When you're seeing a timeline in a linear perspective, and you're thinking, well, sometime Jesus has to return. But like the cyclical perspective is that
there never was any cyclical Christianity, period. Okay, can we move on to the next question?
Okay, fair enough.
Okay, I'm
I
not going to sit
disagree.
here
I
and invent the
disagree.
Christianity
But-
never existed.
I
It's a
disagree.
waste of time. Let's go on.
Okay.
Christians are
All
so
right.
better.
The
Here we go.
expectation that Christ is going to return is not cyclical because you're still looking in the future for another event. How's that?
No, listen,
Well,
here's the
I would
thing.
say that was a misinterpretation.
No, you got to admit something. These guys picked linear time and banned process. They banned circular time. It was banned in
Depending on-
Christianity and Islam.
Depending on the interpretation.
No,
but
no,
we-
no, 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 no. Every
Okay.
fucking Bible and Quran
Not the
says this.
Gnostics. Not the Gnostics.
Well, they're not involved here. We don't talk about
All right,
Gnosticism.
we're talking about
We talk
Leo,
Christianity and Islam. Move, next question.
Shut up. Shut up.
Neoplaton. Okay, I'm sorry I asked that question. Let's
No,
move
no.
on.
Like I'm kind of interested also about Bonnie and Bard's perspective of pre-Neoplatonism versus the present time obsession with bringing back Neoplatonism or something like that. Like I'm kind of interested in both you guys have talked about how much of the discourse today is very much like the meaning crisis and all this is based on axial age thinking, whereas prior to the axial age there's something else that we need to look at.
I'm asking myself the question, what is really interesting and of concern to humanity? And the answer is that to create something larger than tribe that people can live without killing each other. That's the fundamental religious, priestly, philosophical question. Any other endeavor you go into as little boys doing little games with themselves or whatever are not interested in that. The XLH was a waste in that sense because the concepts of empire, nation, and city were developed during the Bronze Age. They weren't created to anybody because they were memorized, but they were developed in the Bronze Age. I think those ideas are extraordinary. And I think especially when it comes to honoring Western culture, the Persian Hebrew axis from the Bronze Age, leading up to Cyrus the Great conquering Babylon 539 before Christ, is the real event. Not anybody dangling on a cross, nobody occupying Mecca or whatever. This is the event. Why? When Cyrus the Great took the concept of empire seriously, he conquered Babylon and shocked the world in a way that nobody else has shocked the world ever before. It was the most messianic act ever, according to both Jews and Zoroastrians. What he did was that he conquered Babylon, and he didn't kill the Babylonians and boil their children in oil, because everybody done that up until that time. That's how tribal the world was. No, he shocked them. He yelled at the Babylonians for not being Babylonian enough. He kissed the feet of their god Marduk. He literally sponsored them to build a temple for their own religion. And he then took the funny Hebrews that he found in the streets that he sympathized with and sent those Egyptian traders back to Jerusalem to build the second temple and sponsor the whole thing. That is the most civilized thing ever done. And we're still fighting that today. We're fighting to keep that civilization going. That concept of civilization will interest me as a philosopher. I think anything else that self-obsessed, navel-gazing, axial-age little boys dealt with is nothing compared to this project. So I want to take the West back to the Persian Hebrew axis, inherited by Heraclitus, who passed it on to Greece. Thankfully, Nietzsche and even Heidegger recognized that Heraclitus was the real major Greek. He was probably not even Greek. He was probably a Kurd. That's more to it historically. So the connection with Persia here prior to Greece, writing down things, etc., etc. The Greeks invented drama, but they didn't invent philosophy. The Persians did. And this is what interests me, where philosophy meets religion, and go back to that sense in the Bronze Age, during the Bronze Age, to then redefine what is empire, what is nation, what is city today, because we have to do that. Otherwise, we will blow ourselves up and kill each other again, as human beings constantly do when they're left to their own devices.
What do you think of that, Bonnie?
Well, I would say we're aligned. I would drive it a little deeper, but I would also say that his book is addressing this, and that is for a long time in history, humans told their origin stories by thinking about the cosmos in we would say mythical terms, but they were metaphysical terms. It's the way they did metaphysics there. And if you look at the early Chan Buddhists or the early Taoists, they were doing metaphysics with drawings and stuff. So mythical terms are metaphysical. And so when they thought of who are we, what is our purpose, what is our origins, it always started in this deeper investigation. And then the story went through that. and the story of the stars and the planet and the animals and the plants, and there was a continuity. And then at some point in, I would say, the Abrahamic Neoplatonism, and I'm not sure, where that's different than between Persian and Hebrew, we started telling, in the early Homer, you could see in Homer, we started telling our origin stories based upon foundational people and the history of a people and territory. This land is our land. And so in Genesis, the whole thing is created in 5 days or 5 days, and then Adam and Eve get created, and then the story gets interesting. So we've lost this whole sense of origin in this whole middle ground. A lot of people go back to cosmology, but this whole, from cosmology all the way through the whole history of the planet and being humans and being planetary has been lost from religion. And now it's just lineage and you're human, two people or a clan and territory. And I think that's what's destroying the planet, and I think any religion that starts with territory and founding fathers doesn't dig deep enough. It's not a deep enough origin story.
I strongly agree. So the pointer is that we have to use digital, whatever it is, to try to unite East to West. We can't afford to go different ways or creating the animosity we do right now. China and America going apart right now, it's terrifying. We created the devil, and the devil showed himself on August 6, 1945. It's called the bomb. And the devil's only become even more powerful since then and more widespread. It's a race against time to create some kind of divinity or whatever we need to help us out to stop the devil from blowing us up. That's the real race. Climate change and other things are secondary to that. That's the real race right now. That's an obvious race. We are in a sort of shock after 1945. I think after 1945, it changed history forever. It was the other big, that was a dark event. If Cyrus the Great to me is the sunshine event, then certainly the dark event is 1945. And we came out of the Second World War, which just proved to us how horrible we can be. We have to go back to the forms. I'm not doing with Plato, I'm doing with Darwin. That's how I work. I do the forms with Darwin because they're developed evolutionarily, they're archetypal, they're very human-friendly. They actually are what human beings repeat all the time. And that's that it's easy for us to be tribal. Now, can we please extend that and see if we can do it larger? And then I look at any mechanism out there that can help us do that. I love trade. I love the trade religions. I love Taoism, Buddhism, and Zoroastrianism because they trade religions. They're not dogmatic. They're not centered. They have no Rome. They have no Pope. But they are preaching spirituality for us as human beings to go spiritual and go deeper and love other human beings and love the stranger, right? And by practicing trade, that's exactly what they do. And we need that. We need that.
They're relational in a way that they're not afraid of losing their identity in the other. Like I want some of yourself, to become like, this breakdown of schizomogenesis, this ability for people to want, in my work, we call it ingress. If I relate to you, then part of you ingresses into me. And if that makes me nervous, then I'm going to defend against true relationship. But if I live in a world of difference, that means I am changing all the time, and I can't capture my own identity because inexorably everything I interact with is changing my subjectivity. So I think that makes I think it makes modern people more nervous because we interact so much on social media and digital. We can feel all these things trying to change us, and maybe, this virtuality of self, maybe the identity itself is virtual.
Oh, we wrote a book called Digital Libido before this one, which is very, very dark, and it deals with the times we live in and why people are confused. The dramatic increased levels of complexity. I would even say today, using Jim Rutt's words here, that the passive aggression of our society responded with an incessant form of irony. And if irony here is the masculine side and passive aggression is the feminine side, this is the worst of men and women right now, and our society is filled with it. But it makes sense that this is the reaction to where we're at right now. This has to be overcome rather quickly, and that's what we're working with. So there are people who try to do what we do, but have a different take on it, and it's the Chinese. They started with Confucius, and they've decided to go big time on having a guy at the top. They don't care about the tyrant. They believe the tyrant is fundamentally benevolent. That's what Chinese people tend to do, and they go for Confucianism. So I thought Xi Jinping would go Taoist. He hasn't. He's gone for Confucianism. My hope that is China can make a Taoist turn. I think we can import Buddhism, Taoism, Zoroastrianism to the West, and somewhere here I see it happening. Women have started that already. Women in Europe and America are changing their religion. They're switching from Christianity to mass Buddhism right now. It's the pop version, but never mind. We have 600 temples and monasteries right now the women have brought to the West. They skipped Christianity. I think it's about, for me personally, it's about time for men to do the same journey and actually start looking at maybe the mass religions that did mass conversions weren't right, that maybe we need to skip them and go for something much more profound and deeper. And that's why I recommend the guys that I live with in my monastery to study these trade route religions and preferably pick one tradition and align with it. And they can pick Taoism or Zoroastrianism and Buddhism, I don't care, but they pick one of them and go with it, and that's what I recommend them to
But
do.
the opposite, I think, is happening. People are doubling down on Christianity. They're doubling down on Neoplatonism and the Stoics and the virtues and all these Platonic things. And
Won't work.
yeah,
My
but
prophecy is that it won't work.
Maybe it's like a supernova or something.
Exactly. The real fundamentalisms today, Islam and Putinism, Islamism and Putinism, are supernova phenomena. Supernova phenomena occur before something dies. It's when Zizek and I agree here. It's when I no longer believe in Allah, but I'm not aware of it, that I start acting on Allah's behalf and start blowing up bombs and myself in the process. So fundamentalism right now is the Russian and the Islamist variety of it. But I'm sure we're seeing a lot of people running after these different things like neo-Christianity. One of them is Jordan Peterson. But at the end of the day, does he believe in the afterlife? No, he doesn't. Then he can't believe the son was resurrected after 3 days. No, he doesn't. Then his Christianity is completely ironic. He does not believe in it at all. Well, then it's better to go to a religion you can believe. When I converted Zoroastrianism in the 1990s, I said, I believe in this religion. It has no supernatural elements involved. I love it. Actually, its name is Mastayasana, which means philosophy. So any philosophy I do is my religion. Of course I converted. I was convinced. I was very close to becoming a Taoist, and I respect Bonnie. I see Bonnie as a scholar of Taoism. I think these are the routes we need to go. I love this work on Gurdjieff, etc. I think it's much more profound. I think just superficially adopting a few traditional bourgeois values and think that's going to hold. Listen, if it doesn't even keep your marriage together, it's probably not that good.
the problem is that people quickly associate the kinds of things Taoists, and I don't know a lot about Zoroastrianism, but where they overlap with scientific reductionism. They're like it's just that's a non-statement, but that's what people think. Like, how can you be a Taoist and how can it be a religion if it's actually accepts what is the case?
Yeah,
right?
I'm a Buddhist, but there's a really bland version of Buddhism in America that is so reductionist and terrible.
Well, listen,
I almost think it's like it'd be better for them to be Christians or something.
Here's the word, but please remember, people often start with the pop version when they're infantile and they grow up, and then they go into more adult versions. This probably is going to happen. We're going to go deeper and deeper, more mysterious with everything, and more profound in our work. That's what we're doing here. Layman, Bonnie, you, we're all doing it. Andrea and I do it. This is the kind of work we're doing, and it's a personal journey for us to do that because we don't think this will hold otherwise. My argument against these revivals and these movements that Bonnie discussed with the Neoplatonists, I don't think they take it that seriously enough to actually die for it. And if you say you believe in something you're willing to die for and save your marriage for, anything that's, takes an effort, then it's just a pose. Yeah, these are poses. These are not sincere convictions.
The problem is that they have been and always have been tribal, where tribal is now the nation state. So you have God, God, family, God, and country, and people will die if they think their country is the Christian country. They'll die for their country, whether they
Listen,
believe
Bonnie,
their
I
religion
live
or
in
not.
Sweden. I live in Sweden. Nobody is a Christian any longer in Sweden. Less than 2% of the population ever goes to church here. It's dead. What we have is Islam and secularization. And secularization is a whole that people are filled with all kinds of political ideology. Woke culture started in this country. Greta Thunberg comes from here. They're going desperate for some kind of religion, but they can't go back to Christianity, and they won't. They're looking for something else. We're now trying to provide that answer. We say, we've looked around the world. Maybe the technology should come from the West, but the religious conviction should come from the East. Why? The East has been around a lot longer. It's been tried and tested, and it's along the trade route to find these schools of thought, the spiritual schools that actually make sense. They require an effort. They demand something from you before you can convert, but that's quality. Don't you want to do Louis Vuitton instead of doing H&M? That's what I ask people. And that's the journey, and it's deep shit work, and it's the only solution. And if a few people do it, it will have a massive effect on the rest of society. I'm convinced about that. So I don't take these poses seriously. I don't see anybody's investing. Skin in the game. If you don't have skin in the game, you don't really believe in your religion. You just put the post out there. I think Jordan Peterson fundamentally only believes in Jordan Peterson these days, and that's a really bad religion, to be honest. And I say this as an old friend who I've lost.
No, I understand. Yeah.
Who I've lost. He's gone increasingly messianic, and it's awful to see.
No, but it's also because like Christianity evolved into something else, which was science, really. Like when you look at all the Eastern religions, which are amazing from a spiritual level, like you only had one religion, Christianity, that evolved into, like, let's say, enlightenment, and it left Christianity behind.
No, it did not. It was Judaism. Come on.
Okay, Judaism.
Christianity fought science tooth and nail for 400 years. This is bullshit. This is bullshit.
Let's say the Old Testament Judaism.
It's a very different thing than Christianity. Let's be honest.
Okay, but the central idea was that the universe was intelligible. So like when you look at like Newton, when you look at like Descartes, there was an idea that, well, the universe is created in the mind of Logos, and therefore we can try to understand it through logic.
Listen, Elung,
like that idea.
Buddhism always.
Sure, but that idea was what created modern science.
No. The printing press created modern science and the capacity to then publish things.
Yeah, but what was the
it wasn't Christianity.
Well, if the printing press wasn't created in India. Like
no, it was
built upon
to Christianity. We got science, to be honest about.
Okay, but fuck Christianity for a second.
Yes.
But just the idea of Logos, like Logos being like the creating force of the universe, which existed in Judaism, to some extent also in Christianity. If we just take that idea paved the way for scientific understanding of the world. Like we can see,
it's
like,
called Asha in Persian, Artha in Hindu. It's called Tao in China.
Sure, I'm not saying that it didn't come from Zoroastrianism, but and even Christianity was based on Platonism. But
I would say
maybe you're talking about technology and not science, because
no, like
I think there's deep science.
When you read like Leonardo da Vinci, when you read like his notebooks, when you read like Newton, when you read like they are talking about the reason why we can even understand the universe is because there is a fundamental structure of Logos, and the reason why.
I think there's a distinction. What Christianity did was a bait and switch. There's Christianity and like the Gnostics and the community and the convivial kind of thing. And then it got so married to Neoplatonism, and then you get Protestant ethics and the worth ethic, which is what produces what you said. But it's really the Neoplatonist line, and that these things are discoverable, these laws are discoverable, and the Protestant ethic that then became what we call modern Christianity. But the religious kind of, lineage is actually lost. The actual
and that's where the big trouble is happening, because it created a divide between like the scientific understanding and spiritual understanding. And like when you read like the alchemists, they're desperately trying to combine the two and failing miserably. So like what I'm thinking is that like the meta narrative needs to bridge like celebrating Logos, but also having a connection to the spiritual. And like that narrative doesn't exist yet.
It
Like,
does. It's called the trade religions of Asia.
Yeah, Vajrayana means
Yeah, we're missing
alchemy.
our point here.
Vajrayana
But
means
why-
Rasayana, which means the way of alchemy.
why didn't the like the Gutenberg press then originate in Asia?
It did in China, but didn't have cheap paper. The Chinese invented it. It just
Okay,
by
but why didn't
by
they have cheap
pure
paper?
chance, because cheap paper exists in Europe. Two innovations into one became the printing press. Europe was lucky. And
Okay,
Europe was
but you have like
Europe
1,000
was
years in
drenched.
China.
Europe was drenched in Inca gold stolen from South America.
That's true.
That's
But, like,
true.
even-
So to say that Europe, idea-wise, was ahead, the problem is this: we forget about history. We have to look at the map we're at today. Shit happens. Start here. We have to look at: are there any ways of doing a narrative today that makes sense to people, that challenges people into the process required for them to be able to handle what's happening at the moment, to take leadership? My response to that, the Silk Road Triad is a good place to start. I'm now going to go into Nigerian and Ethiopian religion over the next few years. I'm going to study Yoruba. I'm going to go to Brazil and study the Africans who arrived in Brazil. There are probably other ways of doing this too. So I see the different patterns here with the different worldviews and see what we can use. The problem now is we have to go quickly into an archaeology of ideas to find something we can build on, because to reinvent fresh new, like I did with Syntheism, is probably not going to work. All it's got to do is then create the worship of a machine that we should obey and submit to. That's all it's going to happen. So to create something much more spiritual, more profound, more humane, we have to use what we have. Now, if you're going to cook, you have to use what you have. Now, my suggestion is that Christianity and Islam have run their way, and they're probably going towards some kind of fucking Armageddon, which they love. Not good if you're going to stop the bomb. What other alternatives do I have? Trade routes. Good. That's the Silk Road Triad. You know what? Most of history of the last 4,000 years, scientific development, technology, happened along the Silk Road, not in Europe. In 1250, before the plague hit us, 9 out of the 10 biggest cities in the world were along the Silk Road. The 10th one was in Mexico. 9 of the 10 biggest cities in the world. Cairo to Xi'an, the 2 biggest cities in the world for 2,000 years. That was civilization. That is civilization. Whatever Europe was in the last 300 years is very, very small and marginal by comparison, and the luck. So to say that, you know, be careful with that, say the West, as you interpret it for Europe, and if you the British and French and German empires and the colonialism is something we should have as models today. I don't think those models work, to be honest about it. We tried them. They didn't work.
No, I agree that they don't work, but I think there is something that we shouldn't necessarily throw up with the bathwater as well. I think there's like like when you look at like, let's say like tribal religion, it's very beautiful, but it's also very cyclical, which means that even today there are uncontacted tribes that lives in basically the same cultural surroundings as they did several thousand years ago. They don't have a need to evolve. So
this goes back to what I'm saying. We have to invent we have to move away from the dichotomy of linear time versus circular time, and we have to reimagine, because these are geometries, and really, like, what is the shape of the ocean? Is it linear because it moves toward the shore? Is it cyclical because of hurricane and heat cycles? Is it or moon cycles? Is it undulatory? I mean, we need to expand the imaginal of time, or else you're caught in this trap. Either Western.
I agree. The point here is that hypertime is therefore not interesting. It's only just a philosophical concept. It's not interesting because it's nothing to do with our real lives. So once philosophy is applied on human beings and our lives, and we want to do the good thing, then it is what is attached to hypertime: the space, the mass, all these different things that are interesting. This is dialectics. We basically lay out 2 basic forms. Time is neither circular nor linear. What do you do now?
Yeah.
It's a fantastic question, Barney. Let's
Great.
pursue it. Let's challenge the people who are getting
No,
engaged in
we
this conversation.
need to invent a new
It's
men-
neither nor.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think
But we
like
have had
one
these
of
two
the
concepts
keys.
in the past, and without the other did not work. We know that if you fall into the process without the event, or the event without the process, then we get the pillar sense of history. Don't do that. Don't go there. Stay with the neither nor until
And
we
it's
have
not
other
spiral
options.
either, because that's
But there's
just,
also
I
like
was
the
wondering about
concept of
spiral.
that's
both and
just
neither.
cheating.
Spiral's
Well-
just cheating, yeah. Spiral dynamics doesn't work here. No.
It also depends on what you're doing. Like, are you going to the supermarket and buying food, or are you trying to fix like your circle of relation with your friends? Like, it also depends on project. So I think like the way we see time, project is a really necessary component because it's both and neither linear and circular. I think projects.
I think this is
project
Bergson.
is necessary.
I think this is Bergson and its difference between time and duration. So I think it's because it was interested in the qualitative aspects of time, and that's what you're talking about here.
Yeah.
We were basically just doing time metaphysically in this book to lay out that there's a contradiction, therefore two time dimensions could be an interesting idea. And the point here is by putting subphysics prior to physics and putting God after consciousness, we haven't allowed anybody to go into one of the two extremes. But I said, no, physics is not first and consciousness is not last. You can't use any of them as primary category. Live with the TE. That's why we invented these two other categories. So we said subphysics is prior and God is after.
But still, if we have the concept project, so like if we are trying to fix, let's say, our relation now, it doesn't make sense necessarily to make a plan. We need like a tribal religion in order to make sense of the relationship within a group. If we need to plan to build a great big tower, then we need a linear religion or a linear set of ideas. So project is really what defines the way we are thinking about like ideas to begin with. So Europe had a very linear, Jesus is going to return. That's a very linear idea. Where like the idea of samsara and like the Buddhist idea was, well, it's always happening in like the wheel of karma. So like it was a stationary society in a way. Then you had like the Silk Route, but the Silk Route is also very linear because you're going from A to B. So like I think project.
No. It was.
I think
not
like the way.
No, the Silk Road logic was not that at all. That's your fantasy. That's not how anybody along the Silk Road perceived it.
No, but you agree with like project. You agree with the idea of project.
Project is prior to subject and object. Yes.
Yeah,
Human beings
exactly.
can engage with things. Yes.
Yeah.
Human beings are social animals. Therefore, project is prior to subject. This is fundamentally Hegel. So
Bonnitta,
Yeah.
I want Bonnitta.
What if time is something like this? Actually, I remember something my student said, and I'm going to turn it into a metaphysical proposition. So what if time is, of course, we as human beings can experience our lives as this, it's a timeline. And we already talked about that. White had said that it's this fact that some potentials are taken out of possibilities is why there is an arrow of time. Okay, so that's true. But what if, I'm going to use your own thing. So along that line, what is actually the case is not just the past, but it seeds more emergence vectors that then get ahead of us and grow the potential for when we bump into them in the future. So now time is this complex. So at every moment, what is actually the case is not only just subsists, but it actually expurgates a new gradient array or a set of emergent vectors that somehow, depending upon these other emergent vectors that this timeline actually goes to, we bump into it again, and that makes all the difference. What if we had that kind of imagination around time?
This is what we call project in our work, and we call it exodology. And this is what's so important today, is to have a dream to look forward to, at least for men. I think women agree, but men certainly need that. So the exodology principle means that you got to imagine something in the past that's higher and further away towards which you pull yourself. Otherwise nihilism takes over completely.
Yeah,
And
what you said reminds me of the Terma tradition, where you create in Buddhist Tantra, you create all these teachings for the future, and you bury treasures like time capsules in different places, and then people discover them. And there's supposed to be some which are just ideas, and others which are actual treasures. You know, I met a bunch of Tibetan monks, and they were burying things, you know, for the future around, you know, in little hidden places off in Canada.
I want to do this with drugs. Put the drugs in the house and not know what kind of drugs are in there. They take whatever I find or something.
Yeah. There you go.
But it's true. So project here, it's not used by Hegel, but the point is to understand Hegel as a subject is subject and object are byproducts of the product, because the product unites the two. There's no subject, there's no object without the product in between, tying them together. This is why Hegel unites ontology and epistemology into one category, ontoepistemology. We then said, once ontoepistemology is united, we create narratology and finally find a home for all the deconstruction work that was done in the 20th century. Says that's a separate philosophical category, which is the stories that human beings tell about themselves. Here are 3 different versions of those, and by the way, they're reducible to one another. Stay with the contradiction again, very Hegel. So that's the work we did here. And the point is that Byung-Chul Han has framed it beautifully, and I think he's absolutely spot on with the problem with Westerners today, as a Zeon monk from Korea, seeing it from the outside. He just said that if there isn't a project, the subject spins into itself so fiercely that it's violence on itself. So if violence disappears in a society, we should watch out, because violence has probably been internalized inside subjectivity itself. Hey, psychiatric ward units and everything exploded at the moment. So this is the problem. A society without a project in itself, the nihilism that it creates in itself, will mean that subjectivity starts hunting itself because it doesn't have a project to go to.
This is similar to what I say about we-space practices. It has to be a 3-legged stool. There's the self, there's the other, and then there's the world, a real world project. And the world project actually coheres the self-other, the intersubjectivity. And this is another point of, I think, agreement here. In different languages, different emphasis.
It's the way 2 traders do a project together. Exactly.
Yes, trade.
Exactly. So this is the project you do with the stranger.
And trade,
and we have to have those products everywhere, otherwise we go to war.
Right. Okay.
That's cool. Trade. I like that. I like that as a.
I love you guys. This is so refreshing. This conversation.
Ending on this idea of trade. I like that. Anyway.
It's great. It's great. So, Andrew, you're the Buddhist here. Do you have a Buddhist commentary to the Taoism and Zoroastrianism and post-Christianity we experienced here in the conversation?
Well,
do you have a Buddhist comment to us right now?
A Buddhist comment.
Final note here, maybe.
You know, Vajrayana is I guess it's a Silk Root religion. You know, I've heard that at one point in Lhasa, for example, in Tibet, there were like 15 different religions, and you know, so there was always a cosmopolitan flow going from one side of the world to the other. So it's not like the East and the West were these 2 separate worlds, in a way. So, but I think that I always think the tantric solution is the best in the deepest sense of tantra, not, you know, just these sex schools which are fine and dandy, but the deepest sense of tantra, which is weaving all these things together. Tantra means to weave, you know, and it's a process of weaving things together. That would be my what is tantric.
So actually the trade route is neither circular nor linear. Thanks to Bonnitta Roy for making that case tonight.
Sure, yeah.
All good, guys. All good.
Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot. And speak soon. I'm going to be off until February, but I'm back in the spring. Love podcasting, love talking to you guys. We'll see what we can come up with in the spring. Bonita,
that's very nice. Yeah.
Nice meeting you, Elung.
Nice meeting you guys.
Yeah, you too, Bonnie.
Good to see you all.
You too, Andrew.
Big love.
See you soon.
See you soon. Bye.